As community activists, ANC commissioners, or as elected officials, whether it be Virginia or Maryland or DC, anybody, what was your best piece of legislation, proposed or passed? And question number two, if you were to be elected, what would be your first piece of legislation?
I would say that the most creative thing I did this city was when I was working at the Board of Education. Am I having a problem with this? My boss, and he said, you know, if we can't change a couple of votes on the school board, no, there's something wrong. If we can't change a few votes on the Board of Education, we're going to have a nasty strike. And my husband was a teacher, and he was in the union. I knew we were going to have a nasty strike. I found a way to stop that strike from happening and change 2 votes so that they accepted the arbitrator's report, and we did not have a 3-week strike, which the AFT was going to throw in everybody they could to make an example for the country. And I think that made life a lot better for a lot of people.
So I think during my tenure on the DC State Board of Education, the work we did around Common Core standards would set the stage for us receiving a Race to the Top grant, which brought $75 million to support education reform. It's probably the most important thing that I was a part of. I think, going forward, continuing my education background, the piece of legislation that I would champion would be to allow the school system to have the type of flexibility that some of the charters have right now, so we can make sure we meet the needs of every single child in every single school in the city.
I'd say in DC, the legislation that I'm most proud of is first of all, it was an ABC regulatory moratorium, but that led to legislation so that there was a ban on singles in all of Ward 6 and several other wards, so I think that accomplished quite a bit. Then as far as what I would introduce, it would be contracting reform. I think you need to get the council members out of choosing the contractors, and I think there needs to be a full review of the pay-to-play culture.
I have never served on council, so there's no legislation that I've set forth. There are issues and concerns that I've dealt with in the community as an ANC commissioner that I'm extremely proud of, and they dealt mostly in Ward 1 with parking issues, and parking in Ward 1 is a major issue, and I still contend that parking is a major issue in Washington, D.C., and I would set forth some legislation that deal with our parking and find some space in the district, particularly vacant lands, that we could put more parking facilities. We're going to ride bicycles, we're going to take the metro, but there's some who don't ride and don't take the metro and need places to park.
The legislation I championed was the Living Wage Act of 2006 and got it passed. The only time in history where we actually had a Living Wage Act. The bill that I'm championing now is the Early Childhood Education Act that would mandate that the chancellor creates a curriculum that provides us a reasonable assurance that our children, upon entering the 4th grade, can read independently and can add, subtract, multiply, and divide upon entering the 4th grade. If not, our children will make contact with the criminal justice system or go on public assistance. And I think that's our greatest downfall right now, is that 40% of the adults in the District of Columbia are illiterate.
It's hard for me to let that go, because it's connected with what I did that I felt was one of the more significant things I did, which is Mr. Orange was actually opposed to the living wage before he was was supporting it. And back in 1999, I led the fight for the living wage in Prince George's County, and it's something that I'm very, very proud of. In terms of what I would do in D.C., the first thing that I would do is focus on campaign finance reform. We need to take the money out of politics.
Thank you. I'm thinking back to when I was on the school board. It was a long time ago, but we were having some hearings on truancy and looking at a truancy study and strategizing about ways to keep students in school. And I think the control board swept in then, and we weren't able to really enact anything. But I think that's still a very critical area. I think President Obama called for, requiring students to stay in school until 18, or they get involved with the criminal justice system. So I don't know if it will go that far, but we need to find ways to keep students in school, increase graduation rates, and also work with parents to support students because they oftentimes need training and support to support their students.